see how you hew to that. We will start with Mollie Fullerton on Flowers of Mary, or Devotions for Each Month of the Year from 1862, followed by Jessica Hagen on Orestes Bronson's The Convert, or Leaves from My Experience, 1857. Hannah Gillow Kloster will then talk about William Hutch's Nano Nagle, Her Life, Her Labors, and Their Fruits. Sadly, the 1875 edition, not the 1845 edition. Oh, you found it? Or?
No,
okay.
I didn't find it. Someone took it out.
If any of you have Nano Nagle,
Anyone? No?
Chelsea has it. I knew it.
Knew it.
And then Matt Sawicki will talk about the Catechism for Curats from 1687. So turn it over to you all.
Okay, so my section of the catalog was under theology, and like the subsections within that were sermons and mysticism. But what really struck me was a large number of Marian devotions that were in my section. I did the math, and like 23% of my whole entire section were Marian devotions, which is kind of a lot. And so when I was originally going to do my label text, I was going to write about one of the devotions to the month of Mary, which is May. And so I went down into library storage, which is where most of my books live, and I found Flowers of Mary, or Devotions for Each Month of the Year. And inside there is a really cool drawing of a church. It's incredibly detailed, and then underneath it says, "And I say to thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." And so I thought that was pretty cool, and so I decided to write about that instead. But still sticking with the Marian devotions because it is a devotion to the month of May, and other months as well. So first of all, like, I thought that the drawing and the writing underneath it was really interesting, but then I started thinking more about the relationship between the standardized devotional book and the really individual and personal nature of devotions and the personal expression in this drawing. And so I kind of went with that. A bit of background about, I guess, standardized devotions. The 1830s to the 1850s was a period of like vast technical improvements in publishing, and so by the 1850s, mass publishing was like the way to go. Just to give you an idea, the number of titles of devotional guides in the 1840s to the 1850s increased by 82%, which is a lot. So a lot of people were doing mass publishing, which led to a standardization of a lot of the devotional literature. And the church was kind of on board with this as well. They kind of had a goal that they wanted to standardize their practices internationally, so they kind of wanted everything to be all the same throughout all of the Catholicness in the world. And in the US, some people associated with the church really supported this, and they thought that it was great, and that standardization would make the church like truly Catholic and universal. But the opponents of it said that it was really imperialistic, and it was an imposition of Romanized customs on a whole church that had kind of its own localized ideas and customs as well. And in addition to the standardization, a lot of the books that I found also were approved by church authorities. Like in the front, there's like a little thing like, "This book has been approved by so-and-so." And sometimes it actually has a signature, which is kind of cool. But other times it's just a name. And so, yeah, and then these books, because they're in the St. Ignatius College Library, also had to be approved by somebody to be in the library. And I feel like that's kind of visually reflected in the stamps, like up here, the Spiritual Fathers Library stamp, and then on the cover page of this book, there's the embossed stamp, which I just think looks super cool. Library of St. Ignatius College, Chicago. And kind of in contrast to this like approval and standardizedness of these devotions. Like, the devotional experience itself is something that's a lot more local and personal. Like, the idea was to kind of have personal relationships with these religious figures like Mary. You were supposed to, like, directly talk to them and stuff. Like, there's this one German book that I found, and it's very dramatic in its use of exclamation points, and it's like, Mary, oh Mother of Mercy, and it's just, it's, yeah, very dramatic and very personal and intimate, which is a lot different from the standardized books. And so kind of how I see the marginalia as tying into this is I feel like it kind of connects what should be a personal experience of devotion with the standardized books that contain these kind of depersonalized devotions. And in this example of marginalia, I feel like the church, I don't know if it's a real church or if someone just imagined it, but I feel like the detail that is in this church kind of gives the book a sense of place, and it kind of grounds and personalizes the book. It makes it really unique to a specific like person, place, and time, even though I don't know what any of those are because I have no idea who made this or when they made it or why they made it. But it really illustrates a personal connection to the book itself. And it also circumvents that approval that I was talking about earlier from church and library authorities. I'm sure that the librarians would not approve of all of this drawing in the book. Library books are supposed to be pristine. And so instead of encouraging an idea of like a standardized universal church, the marginalia kind of localizes and personalizes devotions. Yeah, and overall, I feel like marginalia really raised a lot more questions than can be answered with anything more than speculation and theories, like who created it and why and when. But I think it really illustrates the contrast between the standardizing intention of the people who like created and distributed and approved these books and the more personal, individual, and local nature of the people who used them. That's about it.
So I don't have a lovely little PowerPoint for you guys. I'm going to try not to fall into this hole. I started working on the Jesuit Libraries project last spring. My main focus in the spring was analyzing the origins of the titles in the catalog. Through this process, Dr. Roberts, the archivist, and I discovered unexpected trends in the different divisions of the catalog, and as Dr. Roberts noted earlier, the vast majority of the books in this 1878 catalog had been published in the previous half century. For the majority of last spring, I worked with the theology section of the catalog, and with Dr. Roberts' help, I learned how to create maps on Batch Geo. It's an open source online mapping application, and these maps are really fun and interactive, and a really neat way to look at the material, and the public historian in me loves it. One of the unexpected trends that we saw was the astounding number of French and American titles. New York was our most common imprint location for the theology works, followed by Paris. In addition, of the 1,881 titles in the theology division, more than 1,500 of them were published after the year 1800. 900 alone were published after the year 1850. The oldest American book in the theology division came from the section of the catalog that I worked on this semester, Controversy. So after last semester, I was quite interested in continuing in this line of work. By choosing the theology division and the Controversy section, I thought it'd be a way to answer some of the questions that we came up with, and instead I feel like I only have more, of course. I chose Orestes A. Brownson, I kept saying that Bronson's, memoir, The Convert, or Leaves from My Experience, for the Crossings and Dwellings exhibit. This book is truly indicative of its section. It was published in New York, the most popular theology imprint location of our catalog, and in 1857, right in the heart of when the majority of this division was published. In addition, the memoir touches on several of the major themes of this section of the catalog: doctrine, religious debates, Protestantism, defense of the Catholic Church, and comparisons between Protestantism and Catholicism. Brownson himself also fits into this specific section of the catalog. This work outlines his path to Catholicism through several different Protestant denominations, including Presbyterianism, Universalism, and Unitarianism. He wrote his memoir in an attempt to dispel disbelief about his conversion. Because of his involvement in so many different denominations, there arose public scrutiny of his conversion to Catholicism, whether or not it was heartfelt, whether or not it would last, etc. Catholics questioned his sincerity, while Protestants questioned how often he had previously changed denominations. He was quite the public religious figure. He had been a minister in several different churches and denominations. He published and edited multiple journals and periodicals. And because of this conversion and conversions, plural, he essentially created controversy. I found Brownson to be quite the interesting figure. He was an activist, a preacher, a labor organizer, a writer, a transcendentalist, and a convert. In my reflection paper, I hope to look at the larger issues of Protestant converts to Catholicism and their contributions. Bronson's The Convert is one of 5 works in my controversy section. All these books, these 5, fit quite nicely into this division as well as its specific section. They were all published in the United States, all after the year 1800, 4 out of 5 of them after the year 1850. And based on the research I conducted last spring and this fall, I'm very interested in the story that these books have to offer together. And given the fact that they're all work on converts, I'd like to see how they fit into the larger story of controversy.
Okay. Oh, nope. Just kidding. Okay. So, when I was scanning through the library catalog for the first time this September, one name really stuck out to me for some reason, maybe because it's a little strange. Nagle. I had no idea who or what Nagle was. I guessed it was a woman because of, as you can see, where she is, but who knows. So she's described as the person by whom the church has gained the most since Saint Ignatius. But I'd never heard of her, and I'm guessing a lot of you hadn't either. And also, so to quote her biographer, "We know the names of third-rate statesmen and soldiers, but we don't know the name of one of the best and greatest women of our times." And I was really intrigued and felt compelled to find out more about her, and the more I read, the more I liked her. So I'm going to share with you some of my findings, and also why she was at St. Ignatius, or why I think she was there, more accurately. So Honora Nagle makes sense. This strange name is just a, nickname. Was born in 1728 in Cork, Ireland. She was a part of a wealthy family of strongly dedicated Catholics. Because of the ban on Catholic schools under the present Protestant government, she was sent, some suspect smuggled, to Paris for her education. And quickly there became part of the brilliant society surrounding Louis XV. However, according to her memoir, one early morning, she was returning from a ball, and she saw a group of poor Catholics waiting outside church to help with Mass. And she realized, and I quote another biography about her, how useless was her life and how profitable were theirs in God's sight. So after a lot of soul-searching, she decided to return to Ireland and work for the benefit of the poor in her home country. So in 1750, she set up a Catholic school in a mud hut in Cork, secretly, of course. Despite the grave dangers to anyone associated with Catholic education, which was strictly prohibited under the current rule, Nano persisted, and soon she had hundreds of students. But not content with simply educating young Catholics, Nano was resolved to improve the lives of poor Catholics in any way she could. Wandering the streets at night with her lantern, as you can see, from house to house in the poor quarters of Cork, she gradually became a sign of hope for the hard-pressed Irish Catholics, and her lantern remains a symbol of Catholic charity and good work to this day. So, I hope you can see this. In 1777, Nano established the Presentation Sisters. The sisterhood was the first in Ireland to combine religious life with systematic charitable works. And through them, Nano ensured that her good work would continue after her passing. This table that you can see, it's an insert in the book. It's very ripped, but it's there. Meticulously tracks the expansion of the Presentation Sisters from the first convent in 1777 up until this biography was published in 1874. And this development still continues today as the Presentation Sisters do good work and education all over the globe. So why do I think Nano Nagle was at St. Ignatius? So digging into her life, at the same time as we were exploring the founding history of St. Ignatius this whole semester, I found a lot of parallels between Nano and Father Damon himself. Much like Nano, Father Damon, you could say he ignored the warnings and remonstrances of authorities, in his case the Jesuits in Europe, who didn't really want to fund a cathedral for poor Irish Catholics in Chicago. And he also saw, like Nano, students flock to his schools. And I think this really highlights the dire need for education among his and her constituents and contemporaries. But what really ties Nano to St. Ignatius, I think, is nationality. We can reasonably assume that at least some of the Irish Catholics in Chicago fled from the Protestant regime that I've described, and brought with them their faith, their language, probably their saints and role models, and the books about them. So as you see, there are 2 books about her in this section of 40 women. And they are the only 2 biographies that I've been able to find strictly about her. So Holy Family and St. Ignatius had a strong Irish constituency, and Father Damon had chosen to locate Holy Family Cathedral in an area predominantly populated by Irish and German laborers. And this community would have probably recognized the plights of the struggling Catholics in Nano Nagle's Ireland. And to the Irish Catholics of Chicago, Nano's decision to fight against the Protestant government and keep Catholic faith strong by providing education and care to those suffering would have been an inspiring example. Disliked and disregarded by the high societies of Chicago, the Irish were considered, and I quote from your book, Ellen, unfit for duties of citizenship and always ready for fun, frolic, and fight. So to a group of people described like this, a woman of high birth who tirelessly provided shelter, food, and education to the poor would be a role model indeed to bring with them from their home country and across the Atlantic. So, as is clear from this biography, Nano held an important place in the minds and hearts of Catholics more than 100 years after her death. What's more, she's still revered by Catholics worldwide. And in 1984, the Presentation Sisters initiated the Nano Nagle cause for canonization. And the work of the Presentation Sisters has not gone unnoticed, and I think this is why my book was taken out. Because on October 31st of this year, she was declared venerable by Pope Francis, and one step closer to sainthood, as we can see from The Independent. And it was reported in several news sources, not only Catholic ones, but general Irish ones as well. And I think that's a testament to the importance that Nano holds to Catholics and the Irish today, still. So there is, of course, no proof that anyone at St. Ignatius ever read this book. There are no marginalia in it either, so maybe not. But if they had read it, I think that they would have found a really good role model for Jesuits, for teachers, students, and anyone who needed a good role model. And I think Catholics continue to do so to this day.
Evening. In the theology and polemical theology section, there are catechisms, upon catechisms, upon catechisms. Catholic catechisms in German, in French, in Spanish, Italian, Latin, and I think Dutch, because it looks like irregular German, so I think it's probably Dutch. There are not only Catholic catechisms, there's the Baltimore Catechism, Canisius's short catechism. There are the Baltimore Catechism. There are a great many catechisms. In fact, there is even a catechism from Louvain that was published in 1567. It is probably one of the first catechisms that was published outside the Italian peninsula. The very first, Tridentine catechisms, because the first Tridentine catechism was published in Rome in 1566. So this is a very early one. Unfortunately, when I went to Rare Books to view this treasure, it was clearly, even to my untrained eyes, completely unsuitable for display. Even I managed to pick that up. So, but I found something that I think is even better and even more exciting. As I'm sure everyone here already knows, the Council of Trent was convened in 1545 to settle some central doctrinal questions that were troubling the Catholic Church and settle some administrative issues that had not only led to the Protestant Reformation, but also caused a lot of consternation within the Church itself. So the Council of Trent, the Council of Trent basically was trying to establish a universal system of beliefs and a standard catechism for the entire Church. Previously, there had been other catechisms that had been published locally. Canisius's Catechism Minor is probably the most famous and important, and in fact, the Tridentine Catechism was largely based upon it. The Council of Trent clarified a number of things, and this is actually, the council was sort of the watershed between, considered the watershed between medieval Catholicism and modern Catholicism, because this is where the Church affirmed justification by faith and good works. There was a reform of marriage law and regulation, ending clandestine marriage and requiring the sacrament of marriage to be witnessed by a priest. There were numerous other issues cleared up. If you all know where Father Byerly's office is, I'm sure he'd actually be happy to tell you all about them. He told me about it. It was great. It was a great class, and we can go on it a long time. Now, this particular catechism is very interesting. As I mentioned, the Tridentine Catechism was the first catechism that was intended to be universal for the entire Church. And they were the first one, as mentioned, in Rome in 1566. In 1567, catechisms in Latin began appearing all over Europe. By 1568, the Roman Catechism had been translated into French and German, and vernacular editions were widely available in most European languages within a decade, except for English. Obviously, by the time the Council of Trent closed, Elizabeth I was on the throne of England, making the production, publication, or distribution of any sort of catechism, never mind one in the English language, to be both unwise and unhealthy. So there was a very long delay in the appearance of a vernacular catechism in the English language. And this is the first. And in fact, it would be the last. If you notice, the publication date is 1687. This was published for King James II, who was the last Catholic monarch of England. And it was published the year before his overthrow or abdication, depending on the version of events you subscribe to. So after 1688, there would not be another Catholic catechism published in English until the Donovan translation in 1819. Which would be published in Dublin. There would not be another one published in London until late in the 19th century. So there is a very long gap, and this is actually a very interesting artifact in its own right, because it's a product of a specific place and time, and it marks the transition between regimes and between religious between different types of religious rule and leadership within England. The full title is The Catechism for the Curats, composed by the decree of the Council of Trent and published by the command of Pope Pius V, faithfully translated into English. I really like the subtitle. The subtitle is fascinating. Printed by Henry Hill, printer to the King's most excellent majesty, for his household and chapel, for him and Matthew Turner. And with a little research, there was another publisher in London operating at this time that published Catholic tracts and pamphlets by the name of Matthew Turner. I presume it is the same Matthew Turner. Even though Turner and Matthew are both common names in the English language, I do think that they are probably the same person. There are very few provenance marks and very little marginalia in this book, which leads me to suspect that it was stored or hidden for a very long time. By the time it entered the St. Ignatius Library catalog in 1878, this particular volume was almost 200 years old. It is over 300 now, so it's a really very interesting artifact. And I also think that it's interesting to think that in the late 19th century, there was no custom of separating rare or interesting books from the general circulation, and according to the catalog at least, it appears to have been shelved alongside all of the other catechisms. And despite its interesting story, there are some markings in the book. On the title page, there are the initials MKRIP. This might be maybe the initials of a former owner. But RIP also may stand for Requiescat in Pace. My Latin is terrible, so it's even worse than my German. So. I'm not sure what that mark means, but it's very intriguing. Of course, St. Ignatius made its mark on this ancient and important volume, not just on the title page, but just to make sure, also on the first page of the actual text itself. There is some interesting marginalia. There's a lengthy quote from St. Augustine on the duties and responsibilities of the priest, the characteristics that make a good priest. It is written in both Latin and English. The handwriting looks to be 19th century to me, but I'm hardly an expert. Unfortunately, I didn't take an image. I don't have an image because the lecture and forms I had to fill out to take these images scared me so much that I just kind of got scared and forgot. But rare books, they're not people to mess with. But there are a number of other interesting marks on here, and I've been trying to, there is another older stamp, and using the most advanced imaging technology available to me, which is to say the brightness, contrast, and sharpness control in Microsoft PowerPoint, I did try to make it a little more legible, and it says Etherton, which is a fairly common English surname, but the position of the letters and the overall shape of the stamp leads me to believe that there may be letters that have been entirely obliterated. So I'm really curious about this stamp and where this book may have been before it came to St. Ignatius. I do not know if I will ever figure it out, but I'm planning on yet another trip back to the rare book section, maybe with a magnifying glass or something if they'll let me, and I'll try and do this again. And so that in conclusion, it's pretty amazing that this book exists here. This is really, I got so excited when I saw this. I was so crushed and disappointed that the first one I had picked out turned out to be unsuitable for display. But I think that this is more interesting because one of the themes that we've been discussing in this class and in this project is sort of the challenge of a universal church in an increasingly nationalistic 19th century. And this is actually an artifact of a very similar type of struggle that occurred across the Atlantic in a completely different context. Where the church was also engaged with national forces of government, and there was even stronger anti-Catholicism in England at the time this was published. So no matter how rough the Irish had it in Chicago in the 19th century, it was not as bad as the Irish had it in the 17th. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Is that on? Okay, there we go. Four great panels getting us, I think, into 19th century Americans and thinking about what these books might have meant to them.
That's a very good question. It looks, the size of the book, it doesn't look like there's a lot missing. The margins look pretty normal. It doesn't look like it was cropped very close. And that, I mean, it looks like kind of an irregular stamping, but I hadn't even thought about that. So that's something I'll think about when I look. I'm, you know,
My book was rebound, so just.
well, I mean, this was rebound too. I mean, the binding is a late 19th, early 20th century binding. So this one was rebound. I don't know if the pages were cropped, but that's something I'll look for. The cut on the pages is not even the way you would expect like a late 19th century cropping to be. There could have been rebound previous to that. There could have been any number of explanations. And now there's one more thing about this book that I'll probably never know. Thank you.
You're welcome, no problem.
Is it realistic to assume that maybe you could find other books in the library that have this Etherson stamp? And maybe, I think maybe, is there,
This week?
is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's possible. I
don't
guess
miss this class.
I guess I'm going to go make myself unpopular with the people in rare books. I mean, more so than I already have.
I want to hear your comments tonight.
Huh?
Other questions? Peter?
I'm curious to know. I'm curious to know if the presentation sisters had any presence in Chicago in the late 19th century. That's my first question, and my second question deals not with this particular catechism, but the books in the library that might also have been used in courses at St. Ignatius College. I wonder if there's been any kind of attempt, not just with catechisms, but other books, if to correlate what might have actually been texts used in the courses, as a catechism might have been.
I don't know about later than 1874, but I know that in 1874, when this was published from the table that I showed, there was one convent in New York and one in San Francisco, and the rest were all in Europe. But beyond that, I don't know. But they have a really good website.
Thank you.
I know that in pretty much every course of study at Loyola within the liberal arts, there were at least 2 years of catechism. I'm not sure exactly which text would have been used in class, but I suspect it would have been the 1855 Baltimore Catechism. There was also, it may also have been the Donovan translation, which was originally published in Dublin in 1819, but by 1829 was also being published in Baltimore. But I think but after 1855, the Baltimore Catechism was the standard catechism within the Catholic Church in the United States.
These are all fascinating papers, and one of the questions I had was, did you get a sense of any of the books coming from the men's or the women's Sodality libraries? There was a big building on May Street, and it was Sodality Hall, and each, gender separate, but women had their own library, and so did men, and I'm wondering if you've come across any markings.
I was really hoping, actually, that there would be some of that in my books, because some of them just, like this one to me, at least before I started researching, didn't really make sense to be in this library, because at the point she wasn't anywhere close to being a saint, and this like random woman who had 2 memoirs, but there's actually nothing in these, but there is a page missing, so there might actually have been on the missing page because it's been rebound.
The only markings in mine are the multiple stamps, of course, from St. Ignatius and Cuddy Library. So other than that, that's all I had. There was no marginalia in mine either.
Yeah, I didn't have anything.
I'm sorry to disappoint you as well. I suspect that because of with mine, I suspect that the relatively small amount of marginalia, that it was in a private collection. The dedication, the handwritten dedication suggests to me that it was a gift to a priest or someone who was entering holy orders of some kind, and was probably not part of a library or widely circulating. And I also have the largely, I can't justify this, but I do have the sense that by the time this was on the shelves in St. Ignatius College, this was seen as this was not a book to write notes in, that it was seen as sort of a special object, you know, and not just a catechism, but really an object. So.
Just a quick thing for Mollie about about the marginalia. I was actually just looking at it blown up, and it reminded me a lot of Father Nicholas Point, whose drawings are going to be in the Craftsman Dwelling exhibit. He was an artist, and he also had a tendency to obsess about architectural detail when it came to his churches and the schools that he helped put together. And the handwriting looks familiar, but most 19th century handwriting looks familiar to me. I have no sense of actual handwriting, but you might want to check out. I have some of his digitized pictures on my computer.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I want to underscore what a just gorgeous point you're making in that paper between the sort of universalizing nature of mass production in the 19th century and the dissemination of those devotional guides and the impulse to localize, to personalize it. And one of the things that Mollie came to my office was early last week before we went away for the holidays, and she's like, I can't find these books. Somebody's taking them out. I'm like, oh, I have them on my shelf. and we go and we open one up, and there was a French month of Mary, which I didn't let her take. I let her take the German one, but we just randomly opened it up, and I hadn't seen it before. And there was a cross made out of ribbon with a four-leaf clover, and a French book. You know, so this fascinating way that's being personalized, but also cutting across these sort of what we presume to be ethnic divides, right? That why would something that we might assume would be, you know, an Irish devotional strategy be in a French book? But what I just absolutely love is the way you point out the marginalia is reinforcing that. To have such a localized image of a church, and I hope you can keep sort of thinking about what that might be, and if there's a plot connection, that'd be phenomenal. But also that the quote is the quote about the foundation of the Christian church, right? And you can't get more universalizing than that. So to think about the way people are really crossing and dwelling, right? To, of course, going back to Tweed and to what Steve Kloster loves so much. So it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. I do have, and I'll just ask a final question to Jess. So if you're a Protestant convert, you're controversial? Is that what seems to be emerging in what you see Brownson and the other books that you've uncovered?
No, it seems like his public image is what makes him controversial. It seemed like it was a normal thing from his writing when I read it, that it was common to go between these different denominations, and that when he did finally convert to Catholicism, he was like, I'm here for life, dude, this is my thing. And everyone's like, oh yeah, sure, right? And that's why he felt that he had to write this, is because it was a defense of the Catholic Church without being defensive. And it's really, I think, well written in the way that he was trying to present it. And I don't think that makes Protestant converts controversial, just the fact that he had converted so much and was such a public figure.
And I'm
That
wondering,
combination.
is he controversial to the librarian who put him in that section?
That was actually one of my questions that I'm going to be trying to answer in my paper.
No, because with the other books that you mentioned being sort of similar stories, it'd be interesting to know. I mean, Bronson's clearly a polarizing figure in 19th century American culture for all the reasons that you laid out. If the other four people are equally polarizing, or if they just happen to be Protestants who converted, what makes them different? Why aren't they in Hannah's section?
Exactly, and I found them all on ebooks, so I'm going to be reading them. Oh, I have to read this on Tuesday in order to answer that question.
It's a good use of your time and means. All right, round of applause. More food, there's cookies if you're ready to move on to the dessert course. Panel 3.